Well, ladies, thank you for joining me today.
Thanks for having us.
So good to be here.
Yay! So happy to see you. Gosh, it's been a minute. We were just kind of catching up before we hit record, and I don't even know how long it's been, but it's too long. That's how long it's been.
Too
Too
long.
long.
Too
Too
long.
long. Way too
Yeah.
long.
Ridiculous. But the cool thing is that we're all doing really cool things. Like we just keep doing what we do.
Hmm.
We do. We kind of come in and out. It's all good, and we're all
Yeah.
having fun. So that's what's important. But today, look what I have in my hot little hands. For those of you on the podcast, I am holding a copy of y'all's book, Sobriety for Dummies. A, is it a Wiley brand? A Wiley brand.
Hmm.
Indeed.
So it says, live a life liberated from addiction, commit and enjoy long-term recovery without compromise, empower yourself with real life success stories. Listen, I just got to say, I was reviewing the book. And
You
it
have
is,
sticky notes.
I have sticky notes.
I
Don't be
love
scared.
it.
Don't be scared.
Awesome.
Sometimes I do that to, I always do the sticky notes. And sometimes people are like, oh shit, what is she gonna ask me? And
Yeah.
and I feel the stress because I just wrote a book too.
Yeah.
And when I was done, I was like, I don't want to look at this ever again.
That's exactly. I so know that.
Yeah, it's like
We can
read it.
relate.
My God, do you know how many drafts that you had to do?
Mar.
I think three
I,
or four.
three. Yeah, I think it was a solid three.
Yeah.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We had a team though. Like
Yeah,
they
yeah, we have a
Wiley
team.
Wiley's serious. They give
Yeah.
you the full team. You have a
Yeah, really
technical
great.
editor, the regular editor. Yeah, they are
Wow.
an amazing company.
Love.
So without them, it probably would have been about 10.
10.
Yeah, I lost track. It's like after a while, it's like when do you count a revision? Because if I go back and just update one part, does that
Huh.
count or whatever? But anyway, I went over it so many damn times. I was like, I don't ever want to look at this again. But
Mm-mm.
here we are. Listen, this is congratulations on this book. I would love to hear the story of how it came about. And we'll obviously get into, there was a couple of things. Well, I only marked three places because and listen, there was just so much in this. This is like super comprehensive, but there's a couple of spots that were super juicy. So we'll get into those. But I like some practical stuff. I like the juicy stuff. I really just want to commend you for being so open-minded to all the different modalities and considering so many different variables. But before we jump in, maybe you guys can tell me sort of how this came about.
Tamar.
Well, we were chatting a bit before this. It was almost surreal. Like Wiley had reached out and, shout out to Tracy who kept at it. Because when we first saw the email, I'm like, spam, delete. Right? Because as a podcaster, as an author, sometimes you get a lot of these requests. And then she reached out again and she reached out again. And Lane and I sat down and we're like, okay, is this real? Like, it's not going to hurt to sit down with them.
Yeah.
And so we got on a meeting and she was so great and she told us about the company and I actually bought DOS for Dummies, like the very first
Oh my gosh,
Dummies book that
DOS.
came out. I bought that book.
That's
And
hilarious.
so she explained to us what it was about, that they would actually give us a Dummies book on how to create a Dummies book. She sent us a bunch of, different examples of books. Like they actually sent us three Dummies books and said it's very structured. This is meant to be complex topics, but simplified. And we want you guys to write Sobriety for Dummy because we've heard your podcast. We went to the website and we want just everyday people living in long term recovery write this book. Not doctors. They, of course, get people to fact check and stuff on their team. And Lane and I remember hanging up after the call and we're sitting there and both of us were kind of in shock. Like, did they really just ask us? Right? Because we're just, like you have a podcast, you put it out there and you never know what comes. And it was just us sharing our journey in recovery, in long term recovery specifically, and how we're staying sober that I guess got their attention. And so
Nice.
it did take a lot of back and forth. Like we had just, because of the way we got sober, there was times when we were like, I don't know if we want to do this. But then we just thought, you know what? Lane's like, people are dying out there. Like I've been
Yeah.
thinking about it. We both went back and forth for quite a while, and we're like, we have to write this book. And so we did.
That's amazing. Did you have any apprehension at using the word dummies for those of us who already have damaged self-esteem? It's like, oh man.
You want to elaborate on that one, Lane? We've both been approached about that.
Yeah, I
Really?
think it's kind of this. Okay, first I'm going to back up just a minute and I'm going to get to that question because these are the books that they sent us, right? So they sent us Dummies for Burnout,
Oh,
Addiction and Recovery. I don't know what's
okay.
happening. And then Depression,
Yeah.
right? So I didn't even realize that they had like a self-help section for Dummies
Yeah,
books.
I didn't either.
So when they sent these books and they started talking about the numbers on how many books were being published and how many people were finding these books and using them, there was no apprehension around writing for the Wiley Company and for the Dummies brand. Like it was a done deal. Because I thought if we don't do it, someone else will.
Yeah.
And who else has the experience, our collective experience and how we approach sobriety? Like we're it. We are meant to do this.
Yeah. Yeah. Why not you? Right? Why
Yeah.
not? That's awesome. And so congratulations. That's a really big deal. It's so funny because we got a lot of emails from all kinds of people, they're going to help us with our Instagram accounts or do you get those? Just like all
Yeah.
kinds of things. So it's hard to sift through the noise sometimes. But I kind of thought we would start, or maybe we can start. Where would you like to start? Is there something that you want people to know as they approach this book? Because it's really big. It's a big book. It has lots of topics. Do you have sort of a recommendation for how to approach? Is it just start on page one or?
Um, so I want to go back to your question about the dummies part of it too, because this
Oh,
ties into this,
uh-huh.
is that, when people look at it and say sobriety for dummies, a lot of people get offended. And
Mm-hmm.
we've had counselors use this in their sessions, like give this to clients. Treatment facilities can use this book. So, we've had people say, well, it's not for dummies, it's a serious thing. But
Mm-hmm.
Wiley has always prided themselves on taking complex and serious topics and
Yeah.
simplifying it, right?
Yeah.
So it's not really, like it's sobriety is not, as you know, for dummies. It's
Mm-hmm.
a serious topic and it's something that needs to be talked about. And I think, getting into the book, they've also designed these books so you can jump in anywhere, right? So if you are interested in getting sober, and we didn't write it to get sober, right? Because there's so many different ways to get sober. We wrote it for those people who are looking to stay sober, because that's really what the problem is. I mean, there's lots of
Yeah.
people getting sober, but people get bored, people get complacent, they don't have a community, and then they go back out. And for a lot of us, that is to die, right? For me, it is. For Lane, it is, and
Yeah.
probably for you as well.
Yeah.
And so they've really, it's genius how they set these books up, and that's how we wrote it. Was any topic in here, you can flip it open, and if you're like, hey, I want to learn about purpose today, right? I'm feeling a little blah about my career, and I, as somebody who's sober now, like, how do I look for a new job? How do I discover my purpose? And so you don't have to jump in at page one. You can, but you don't have
Mm-hmm.
to.
Mm-hmm. And one of the things that was really important to me, Arlena, is that we did not write a book on how to get sober.
Okay.
Like that
Yeah.
was a hard no for me. I was not stepping into that pool of water. I wanted like, no. So when Tamar and I were going through this of like, how are we going to approach this subject? That was the line that I wasn't going to cross.
Okay.
So going into it, Tamar and I had to kind of like massage, like, well, how are we going to do this? And so it really became about, because Tamar is so passionate about helping and supporting people find their passion and their dreams. And I'm really all, like full body wellness. It was like, well, let's talk about, the long-term recovery on how to maintain sobriety, full body with full passion, like with full purpose. Let's write that book. And then I got fired up. I was like, okay, I can write that book. Otherwise, like, no, not, because I didn't want it to be another, like, sobriety book. That's no. Mm-mm.
Yeah.
And not enough
There's a
people,
lot out there now.
yeah, not enough people talk about long-term recovery. And I'm in long-term, we're all in long-term recovery here. So let's talk about that and how to make that possible, because the person at 20 years or 30 years can still go out and drink again or blow their head off. So
Well,
how do
that's the
we,
thing.
right? Like, how do we not do that and be really happy and love up on life?
Lane, how long have you been sober for now?
Now it's 28 years.
28 years. And what about you, Tamar?
I'm coming up to 13.
Nice. Oh, lucky 13.
Lucky
Right?
13.
I know, I'm still a baby.
Still a baby. No, listen, it's what's interesting about long-term recovery is that, recovery is for me a process of emerging and evolving. And what we need at different stages of long-term recovery changes, right? Like you can raise my boys are college age now. They haven't quite flown the coop yet. My husband is trying to like, don't know. They don't need to leave. It's fine. We're all good. Such a peaceful household. I love my boys. I don't want them to leave. He's all go, go. Anyway, that's a whole nother thing. But it's, we reach menopause, your kids are grown, but like, we went from like raising little kids. And so like your needs are different at every stage. So I really appreciate these ideas about your purpose can evolve and change over the years. And it's like, how do you continue to reconnect with yourself? How do we continue to sort of reshape the default mode network and, recognizing where our limitations are maybe while continuing to grow in other areas?
Yeah. And we talk about the different stages too, right? The 1 through 5, 5 to 10, 10 on, because you have a very different outlook. And I think that's what made this book so cool is that Lane and I are both in completely different stages of our recovery. And so, I'm much closer to the early sobriety than she was, right? So I could point out things that I'm still working on today.
At
Right.
13 years.
At 13 years, I still feel like a baby.
Early recovery. Man, I remember being like a year sober, being like, woo, it's been a long haul.
Right?
And I was in a meeting, some guy was like, gosh, I'm just coming up on 3 and I feel like I'm a newcomer. And I was like, oh, isn't that funny how perspectives change?
Yeah.
Granted, the beginning feels long. Well, listen, it does, the table of contents, there's the introduction, there's basics of sobriety. It's good to sort of like, have foundational knowledge. What are the basics? Just how you decide, overcoming emotional challenges, developing long-term sobriety. Um, I want to jump to page 72 and 73, drafting your sobriety blueprint. I just thought this was so interesting because so this was Nora's sobriety blueprint. How long? It looks like she'd been sober for 16 years. Do you remember this part? Probably.
Yeah, exactly. I'm going in
Do
there.
you have this book memorized? Of course.
Oh God.
Yeah.
Just like, ugh.
Well, I'll just
Yeah,
say
she's
this.
16. That's right. Yeah.
16 years of sobriety. And it was like, okay, well, what is her blueprint? And I thought it was so great that it starts with identifying triggers and stress. Man, for me, that was like pretty early on activities that I needed. But I think the triggers of stress can change over time. How did you guys come to getting Nora's sobriety blueprint? Lane.
Okay. Okay.
Sorry, I'm going to start calling out names so you know who to.
So for me, the work that I do, I look at somebody's DNA and I look at their blueprint. So when I was kind of transferring my information, I was like, how can I take that information and use it in sobriety? How can we look at this as a roadmap and a blueprint to keep the language kind of consistent with the work that I do? So that's how the blueprint came about. And how do we identify, where do we start? What are we going to look for? What's going to what's going to matter on the blueprint. So that's how this kind of evolved.
Yeah,
And
I love this because there's like you identify the triggers and the stressors. You
mm-hmm,
know, she mentioned things like, you know, a divorce proceedings,
yep,
concern over kids' well-being. I mean, listen, who doesn't relate to that?
yep,
Loneliness, feelings of failure. I mean, those are huge triggers, but then a clear outline for coping strategies, regular attendance at support meetings, scheduled check-ins with friends, peer support, a daily mindfulness practice, you know, a support network, routines. These are all things that hopefully people learn early on that
I
can,
I think they forget though.
yeah,
And
yeah.
Like they
I see.
do.
I mean, we
I
have
think
quick
there's like
forgetters.
a forgetting, like there's a built-in forget, like what was I doing in my early recovery again?
Yeah.
You know,
And so this is like like so she's talking about a divorce,
mm,
right? So
mhm,
this, you know, it is one of those things that like pain really does take you back to, okay, what are the basics? What are the skills that I learned that can help me now?
yeah,
mhm.
yeah, yeah. This was a heavy moment in someone's recovery
Yeah, for
that
sure.
she wanted to survive and thrive through it and
Yeah.
not pick up a drink.
Yeah. You know,
And
we want to go through these times of stress with grace and dignity, right?
yeah. And I think, when those things happen, especially, I mean, divorce, I was divorced in very early recovery,
Hmm.
but we grow if we're
Hmm.
working on our sobriety. And oftentimes we grow apart from the people that we were with when we
Oh,
were still drinking, right? So that may look totally different because then there starts to become that disconnect, right? So your triggers also evolve,
Hmm.
right? They're different. So that loneliness too, especially with a divorce, it's like, oh man, like it's been years now and I need to do this because we're growing apart. So,
yeah. Did you find that in recovery, like you find yourself married to somebody and you're like, uh-oh. Like, did you have that uh-oh moment where you're like,
Oh yeah.
uh-huh.
Oh yeah. I
yeah,
think that's something that it happens. And if it doesn't happen, I haven't met any woman yet that has gone through that in long-term recovery and long-term relationship. I think it's
yeah,
just a life thing.
Mhm.
it is a life thing for
Yeah.
sure. And Samar, you were married before you got sober?
I
Uh,
was, and we separated right after I got sober because he was also an alcoholic. And I
mhm.
remember 3 months after I was feeling lonely, I was isolating, but I was also starting to branch out a little bit and meet people that were sober. And I asked my ex-husband at the time, I'm like, can we just go out one night without you drinking? Like just one night and go have a dinner where I'm not just sitting here watching you drink. And we went out and had nothing to talk about. Absolutely nothing to talk
Uh-oh.
about. And I knew then that that's it. Like if you can't have a conversation with me unless you've had, 4 drinks under your belt, then we're not meant to be together. So we actually got divorced that following year. Like we separated right away and then I got a divorce because I knew that we just couldn't carry on.
Yeah, that's a shocking revelation, I would imagine, to be like,
Yeah.
who are
Mhm.
you? Like, who am
Right.
I? And who are you? Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yes.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, and our true selves tend to emerge. Like recovery is about recovering our whole self, right? And then
Right.
who you really are emerges. And then sometimes you look around at your this, you know, friends too,
Hmm.
right? Like I looked around at the friends I was hanging out with, and I'm like, these are not my people. What are we doing? What am I
Right.
doing here? Yeah, that can be pretty stressful. I kind of want to jump ahead to something I don't get to talk about too often, which is, you know, you have a section here that touches on seeking professional mental health support with medication and exploring alternative treatments in recovery. And I gotta say, I'm a little obsessed. Like, I'm a little obsessed with ideas that I started. I have interviewed people. So I'm just so you know where I'm at. I'm at page 166 and 167. Um, I have interviewed people who do psychedelic assisted therapies. And
Mm-hmm.
this is probably the most groundbreaking tool that we have seen in the last 30 years. And
Yep.
I remember speaking to, you guys probably know Dawn Nichols from She Recovers.
Yep. Yep.
She talked about 30 years ago when her and her husband were getting sober and he went on Prozac. There were people in those programs who are like, you're not sober. Silly, silly people.
Silly.
I always have to qualify and say the people are not the program.
Correct.
The people
Yes,
can be
thank you.
problematic. Yeah, the people can be problematic, but they are not the program. The steps of the program, whatever. That's my qualifier. Um, but and actually, if you go to AA.org, they do have a pamphlet around medication, and they basically say we have no opinion. So, but having said that, there's so much research coming out about things like ketamine and psilocybin, ayahuasca, MDMA, all these different tools that we have now. Did you have any apprehension of addressing? No.
No, not at all.
Sassy, sassy pants.
We were
Says no.
actually I felt it was incomplete. Like I was like, this has to go
Yeah.
in. I have to go back. Like we had
Yeah.
submitted and I was like, no, it's
Oh,
I have to,
without it.
yeah. And I was like, this is it doesn't feel right for me.
Yeah.
And I did the whole part on like all of it, all the treatments. I did a
Yeah.
deep dive on all things because I'm super, again, with the work that I do, I know that this stuff works.
Yeah.
Right? Like I've assisted people coming off high dosage of opiates and like just crazy stuff through alternative treatments,
Mhm.
alternative methods.
Yeah.
So I'm all for finding the methods that's going to help you stay above ground and find the recovery that's they need.
Yeah.
That's just so important.
I'm totally on board, and I had to wrestle with, those of us, in the parlance of 12 step, it's all about abstinence, and we need to be careful about, is this another, pill or fix or whatever. But the way where I landed is that typically these are, what's the right word? Like chemical agents. I'm missing the right word. Compounds. Is that fair? Compound
Yeah. Yeah.
that actually is the opposite. Like drugs and alcohol for me was about running away from my feelings or numbing my feelings. And these tools are actually doing the exact opposite, where they help you connect to the things that you were avoiding. Um, and so you're really actually meeting these things head on without all the resistance. Is that fair to say?
That's yes.
What would you like to add to that? Because it's a, because where I'm coming from, the
Yeah.
whole, we don't take nothing no matter what type of thing, to we need to be able to use our discernment
Mhm.
to to know when it's appropriate to do these kinds of things.
I think now the evidence, the scientific evidence, the literature, the research, the clinical, practical,
Trials and
all of it, right? It's just so evident that these support people in finding recovery
yeah.
with healing trauma, with becoming present, with changing the dopamine receptor, with like all of that. We didn't know 25 years ago, 50 years, 60 or 70, right? We didn't know all
80,
that,
yeah.
So I think it'd be remiss to say you cannot touch this stuff. Keep having trauma in your life. Like
Yeah.
keep going in that cycle. Like Jesus, I don't want that. Like no.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
And it's, you said it, Arlena, it's in the literature.
Mm-hmm.
Like it doesn't, I think, and that's as humans, we do it with religion, we do it with politics. We have our own perception of the way things are going to be, and then we create these rules. And I hear it all the time, and I'm like, who are we to judge anybody? Because if they're staying sober or their version of sober, does it really matter? Like if they're trying to be a better person, they're trying to create a better life for them. And I agree. Like a lot of the stuff I personally would have to be really careful with because I am somebody who could get a little bit, but I know that about myself. I have a lot of
Yeah.
self-awareness on that. Am I open to it? Absolutely. Do I have friends that do it that are 12 step? Absolutely. And I support them in it. And I'm actually intrigued. Like, I want to know what they're going through. I want to know what
Mm,
their experience is. But it's like, who are we to judge what sobriety means? We do have simple definitions that we talk about in here, but I
Mhm.
think it's just really
in here, you mean 12 step. Let's
in
get
the book.
real clear. Okay.
Yeah.
Because I don't think we define that in our book, but
We do brush in it in the
okay.
earlier times of, what
Hmm.
is sobriety, what does recovery mean kind of
Yeah.
thing. But yeah, it's just like, who are we to judge?
Hmm.
Yeah.
Nowhere
Yeah.
in there is there a rule that this is the criteria of what it means to be sober.
Right.
And we
Yeah.
forget that, I think, as human beings. We
Mhm.
really forget that.
Well, it's easy to want to, I mean, we're kind of a group of people who likes black and white. We like
Yeah.
some of us really require and really thrive under really clear boundaries,
Yeah.
right? Especially in early recovery, but we're talking about long-term recovery. And if after 20, 30 years you're still wrestling with some really deep trauma, you've done all the EMDRs, cognitive behavioral therapies. You
Mm.
spent years doing talk therapy, internal family systems. Like you've done all the things,
Mhm.
and you
Mhm.
still feel like like you have a calling and need to go deeper.
Mhm.
Then these are tools done in in a safe environment with support. They're useful.
And
Mhm.
people are dying, right? So
Yeah.
why wouldn't we offer them another
Yeah.
alternative?
Yeah.
Yeah, I hear people in long-term recovery, the biggest, it's not relapse and death from drugs and alcohol. It's things like, they die from things like depression
Yeah.
and they just can't take it anymore.
Suicide.
Hmm.
Suicide. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is really important. Um, you do talk, there is also, the important, like almost on the next page, it's like the importance of open-mindedness in recovery. And yeah, I feel like the only thing that I know for sure after 30 years is that I don't know what's right for anyone else.
Right.
That's the only thing I'm clear on.
And I think what's so beautiful now is that, after the pandemic, like the pandemic really brought people together in recovery and opened the doors to recovery,
Yeah,
right? In this way that we had never seen before, right?
yeah,
We had never really seen people getting and staying sober in the online space.
right.
Like that's really cool. And
Yeah,
the gray area drinkers, right? Like there's all different types of recovery for whoever wants it.
right.
And the open-mindedness, I think, is like an absolute. Like that, there's the black and white from me, Lane Kennedy. That is
Hmm.
my absolute. That's my must. You must be open-minded on this journey to heal.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It really speaks to that idea that everyone wants transformation within their current belief system.
So
Doesn't
true.
I get it, I do too sometimes, but yeah, open-mindedness is really a requirement, even if it's just a teeny tiny little
A
bit.
little bit.
Yeah. Yeah.
Tamar, do you have a favorite part of this book?
I do. Chapter 9, because it focuses on purpose and joy.
Oh, tell
Uh,
me.
well, I think, my life really changed when I realized I didn't have to have the corporate job, the marriage, the house, the white picket fence life. I could actually do more, and I was actually capable of more because of what I had been through. And so when Lane and I talked about it, she's like, that's all you. Like you give her, right? And she, of course, had to help me make it sound a little bit more professional, because I am Canadian, so it had to be translated a little bit. But
That's hilarious.
um I just, I really am passionate about wanting people to understand, especially people who have suffered from, have overcome, adversity,
Mm.
addiction, alcohol, all of that kind of stuff, that they're capable of so much more than they think.
Yeah.
And that's why I wanted to focus in on that chapter and help people kind of get, even just a spark
Mm.
going, where they're like, hey, maybe I could try this. Like I've actually started diamond art, and I'm not a crafty person. I'm a very creative person. And Lane's laughing because we do talk about this on our show. But it's like, I never thought I would be doing this kind of stuff, and I love it. It's actually a new form of mindfulness for me because I can just sit and put these little dots on a page and not think about anything, right? And
Isn't that amazing?
I never thought that would be part of my day-to-day life that has led me to where I am now, where I actually get a little bit of downtime, and during the day I get to love what I do, right? And
Mhm.
my purpose has evolved. So, yeah, that is absolutely my favorite.
Yeah, I love this. It's exploring personal passions and interests, identifying hobbies and activities that bring you joy, reconnecting with long forgotten interests, journaling your interests. I love this. So many practical tools because a lot of times people get sober and I'm like, what do you want? And they're like, I don't even know. Like
Yeah.
they don't know who they are. They don't even know
Yeah.
what they like anymore because addiction is one of those things. It's sort of like a narrowing of things that bring you joy. And, going, trying to remember the things that brought you joy when you were young, like when you were a kid, like what did you like to do when you were little? That
Mhm.
kind of, it's a nice
I
way
love
to,
that you just brought that up.
yeah.
Okay, so I just connected dots. I just connected dots. I'm so excited about this moment. I used to love when I was a little kid, like, I don't know, 5, 7, 7. I want to say 7 to 10. I had a banana seat bike and little pom-pom things on the handlebars, right? And I used to just go out and ride that bike, and it brought me so much joy. And Tamar, what have I rediscovered?
Biking.
I get on the bike and I ride now like 8, 10, 15 miles 3 times,
Wow,
four
it's
times
no
a week.
joke.
And I am like, so like, that's it. I rediscovered something from when I was a child that I love doing, and I didn't connect it until right then. That's so cool.
And
Well,
I get
listen, you're
voice
the
memos.
mindfulness. Oh,
I get voice memos of her like on the bike. You can tell she's on the bike and she's so excited about it.
yeah. Are you guys using Marco Polo?
Sometimes, yes.
I love that
Uh,
little video app sharing
But
for those of you who don't know.
these things, like, people get complacent in their
yeah.
Yeah.
recovery, and it's a part of the reason why a lot of people will relapse, right? Because
Yeah.
they fall back into the life they think they should be living when
Hmm.
they could actually be creating a life that they want to be living, that they don't
Yeah.
want to escape from, and that's really important.
Yeah. Being intentional. I
Yeah.
love that. What about you, Lane? Do you have a favorite?
La 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 la. Well, I think I'm flipping through the bay.
I
I
mean,
think,
there's so much.
yeah, there is so much.
I think of you as like the mindfulness, and I think we just had a perfect example of that, being mindful and present in the moment, and noticing joy in the moment.
Yeah, that's really fun. I think, chapter 5, which is the genetic factors and environmental influences, because understanding your DNA and understanding where you come from is so key to
Yeah.
your personal evolution and your recovery. Like, so when I was writing this chapter, trying to, again, Wiley's like, okay, are you sure you want to write about that? I'm like, yes. Like, this is really important. Understanding that you probably, if you're reading this, you probably have a genetic predisposition. And how do you support those genes that, call you in the middle of the night to go stand in front of a refrigerator and binge ice cream? How do you deal with that at 10 and 15, 20 years sober?
Yeah.
Well, you find out about your genetics. You find out how to take care of that. So this chapter really um, is like a little labor of love right here.
Oh, I
And
love that. So it's like understanding genetic predispositions, exploring
Yeah.
family history,
And the
why your
cool
genes matter.
part is right before we wrote this book, Lane actually was like, Tamar, let's do your genetics.
Mm-hmm.
And we talk about it a lot. It's like,
Yeah.
why wouldn't you want to know all these things? Like, it's very common, I'm sure you've heard, for people in recovery to go full on into fitness right away. And for some of us, that's good. And for others, like myself, I found out, I need to rest more. I can't do long, like,
Mm-hmm.
state cardio. It has to be shorter spurts.
Mm-hmm.
And so I learned that. I also learned that caffeine is not good for my body.
Mm-hmm.
Probably most of us love caffeine. I mean, I used to drink Red Bull until I landed in the hospital when I got sober. So, but like, right there, it was caffeine is one of those things that
Yeah.
can create problems for me. So if I know that stuff,
Mhm.
I know what I need to change according to my body. It's not one size fits all.
No,
So
no.
it was fun.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's fun.
Yeah.
What I love about looking at all this stuff through the science lens is it kind of makes it impersonal because I tend
Mhm.
to notice what I'm not doing right and then make a moral judgment of myself, right? Like a
Mhm.
moral judgment. And I think,
Mhm.
that's
Mhm.
pretty typical, especially early in recovery, but still even in long-term recovery, it's like, man, I just can't get past this. Like I struggled with sugar for a long time.
Mm.
It was like, man, it must be some sort of moral failing on my part. And when you understand the science
Mhm.
behind like sugar addiction and things like that, then I realized, oh, it's a mechanism. I
Mhm.
eat sugar, it kicks off this cascade of chemical reactions and has a very predictable outcome,
Mhm. 100%.
including creating the craving.
Mhm.
So I was like, oh, now that I understand the mechanics of it, then I realize, oh, it's not just me. It's a
Mhm. Mhm.
biological, physiological
Right.
response.
Did you get relief from that though? I mean, understanding that kind of evidence?
It gave me a little moral support, like,
Yeah.
oh, okay, I'm not this, I think tendency is to think that I'm broken in some way.
Mm.
Like there's something wrong with me. I'm
Mhm.
fundamentally
Mhm.
broken in a very certain way. And having this information was helpful. Now I needed to follow through with action,
Mhm.
right? Like I had to be prepared for the sugar detox.
Right.
had to change change in exercise and diet in general, more water, stuff like that kind of helped me get over the hump. And
Yeah.
now I don't even think about it.
So
But
great.
yeah,
So cool.
but the science helped for sure.
Mhm. Mhm.
Understanding the why because the answer was it's not my fault, which I just assume everything's my fault.
It's not your fault.
Oh,
It's not.
or a Goodwill Hunting moment. Listen, this is such an amazing book. There's so much to unpack here. Was there anything else? I know we were a little short on time for this round. Was there anything that we didn't cover that you feel like would be important to share before we tell people to go out and get this book?
I
Lane.
think, well, there are a lot of personal stories in here that
Hmm.
were submitted to us that showed various lengths of recovery. People that are, really, have the kids, the family, the jobs, who are 10 and 15 and 20 years sober, who are going through some times, like Nora, right, with the blueprint
Yeah.
story. And I'm so grateful that we collected those stories to show, like, here's some evidence. Here's what people are doing that's working. And here are some tools that go along with it. There's a lot of exercises in the book
Hmm.
to support the journey of long-term recovery.
Yeah, I love this. It's the combination of, this is what I want you to know, and this is what I want you to complete,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
right? Both the knowledge and the action behind it. Yeah. What do you think,
I
Tamar?
well, I think, just to piggyback on what Lane said too, there's so much in this book. So just, if you're having a rough day, just to open the book.
Right.
Open the book, you might become a little overwhelmed at first, but if you go to the table of contents and just kind of finding that area that speaks to you, because it's not a book you have to read. Like you can plunk it over and read something, whether it's a story, whether it's an exercise or, a paragraph, and there's going to be that relatability, right? Um, it's not meant to just go from front to back. And I love that about this book. I love that I can just crack it open and, well, that helped me today. I
Yeah.
know we all know another book that does that for us too, but this is one of those books where I can
This
crack
is
it
one of those
open
books.
and I can learn about anything, because it was a lot. Like when we did the brain dump, it was a lot of information, but I
Oof.
think we
Yeah.
sorted it out as best as we could, and I'm happy with the outcome.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me, scrolling through my podcast apps, right? Or scrolling through like Audible, looking for books that kind of speak to me at different times. I mean, I almost felt like I almost had that same experience, like going through the table of contents. It's like, what's, because different things speak to you at different times. And, I almost kind of had that experience of like, scrolling through podcasts, looking for what kind of resonates. I was like, oh, wow, this is really kind of hitting all the topics that, people are going to experience, whether it's grief, divorce, like, who am I now?
Yep.
Who am I? So, yeah, well done. Thank you so much for coming on and talking about this book. It's gonna have a huge impact, I know, and this is like one of those timeless things, right?
Mhm.
It's gonna be a perennial seller. Where, Lane, I'm going to do this individually. Lane, where can people find you if they want to learn more about like the genetic testing and that kind of the work that you do?
At lanekennedy.com.
Easy peasy.
Easy peasy. Yeah.
We like that. What about you, Tamar?
I would say just go to Your Sober Now What, and you can check out the podcast. You can check out the book. We have a link to download it there. You can listen on Audible now. They did a great job on that. Yep.
Yeah.
Oh my God, they put this in an Audible?
They put
Yeah.
that in an Audible. So
Holy Moses.
download your Audible book.
Yeah. It's great on audio too.
Yep.
They
They
did,
did a
she
great
did an
job.
amazing job.
Yeah, I love Audible. I'm just perpetually busy, so I like to be able to, but I always like to
Yeah.
have, I always like to listen to something.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So that's awesome. Well, ladies, thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks so much for having us, Arlene. It's really great to be with you and to share recovery. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you.